very soon, and it might be 5 years or it might be 50 years, depending on who you talk to, we're going to 10x or 100x the total amount of intelligence on the planet Earth. And like, what does that enable us to do?
Hey everyone, welcome to Founders and Arms podcast with me, Immad Akhund, co-founder and CEO of Mercury.
And I'm Raj Suri, co-founder of Lima and Tribe. Today we have the one and only Paul Buchheit coming back on the show. We had a great time chatting with him last time, around 6 months ago, about everything that was happening with AI. And it was actually one of the episodes that our audience cites the most as the ones they love. So we're excited to have you back, Paul. Welcome.
Great, thank you.
So Paul, you're partner emeritus at Combinator. What have you been up to? Are you kind of just taking some time off, or are you kind of diving into something new?
Yeah, pretty much. I feel slightly guilty about it, but honestly, I just kind of tend to enjoy life. I know we're not
Wow,
supposed to
enjoying
do that.
life.
Yeah,
I don't think you're
so,
supposed to do that.
yeah, spend time with kids, and just kind of keep up with things, and try to imagine, kind of where we're headed. Um, and so technology is changing pretty quickly, and a lot of times we're not really sure why. I've started just asking a lot of different people. Um, what's your vision for 2035, right? What do you want to see? I love to do kind of these time travel exercises. Um, I love the movie Back to the Future, so I always kind of think in terms of like, getting in the DeLorean and
hmm
punching in.
Yeah, that's a fun question. Is
Yeah,
it mostly like other founders you're asking, or like
well, everyone,
researchers?
but
Like,
yeah,
yeah.
I've asked a bunch of different founders. I asked Sam. We had a YC AI retreat back in January where we brought in kind of a bunch of the top AI founders from YC. And so I was asking Sam what he wanted to see in 10 years. His was probably the most ambitious. He was hoping that we'll have launched the first batch of von Neumann probes.
There's a really good book series called Bobiverse. Have you
Oh
seen
yeah,
it?
I'm reading it
It's
right now,
about this
actually.
like crazy human uploaded AI that like is in one Newman probes and like goes. It's a really fun book. It's actually one of my favorite audio book series.
Yeah, I'm actually
Well,
on the second book of the Bobiverse right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
mm,
love some of the science fiction. One of the things that's interesting is there's essentially no science fiction that actually anticipates our current period in time, right? Even kind of the theory of the Bobiverse was that they still haven't really figured out how to make de novo AI.
mhm.
And so what they are doing instead is scanning they sliced up his brain and then scanned it and then put it inside of a computer, and they're just simulating a human. And I actually recently read another book by the economist. I think it's Robin Hanson. He wrote this book called The Age of M. And the book is only like, I don't know what, maybe 15 years old. And it's completely out of date because he starts off by talking to a bunch of experts in AI. And they basically, his conclusion from talking to everyone is that it's going to take at least 400 years for us to develop, like new AI. And so he comes to the same conclusion, which is that long before we figure out how to build AI, from scratch, we will have scanned humans. And so his entire thesis is that, the world 100 years from now will consist of these, he calls them M's, which are like emulated humans. And then from there, he extrapolates wildly to, talk about what they'll do for leisure and other kind of absurd ideas.
I mean, the future is famously hard to predict. I mean, even 10 years ago, I would have found it hard to predict that we would have AI that's as smart as it is without it being sentient. Like this idea of like an AI that is like basically can do like pretty complex intelligent tasks, but like doesn't seem to have any of its own intent is a weird idea, right? Like I don't, at least I wouldn't have predicted this is what would happen. Yeah.
Because yeah, again, kind of like going back to the time travel question, it was 10 years ago, pretty much exactly, that we were spinning up OpenAI. So, a lot of people don't know OpenAI came out of Y Combinator. It was originally called YC Research. And we kind of reached the point where we believed that AI was imminent because of the increasing success of deep learning. Which I also recently learned there's still a lot of people who don't believe deep learning is intelligent, but that's an interesting surprise. Uh, but we didn't know how it was going to play out. And one of the big fears at the time was don't know if you remember, like 10 years ago, the really impressive thing that AI was doing was playing video games. And so there was this idea that you had this objective function, like making the score go up. And so that was where I think some of the ideas like the paperclip maximizer, we had this idea like, what's the function that's going to drive it? Um, and we kind of assumed it would be one of these sort of evolutionary survival things. And that's very scary, of course, because then, part of that survival algorithm might involve like wiping out all the humans. And so I think like things have turned out better than we could have imagined really 10 years ago. And for exactly the reason that you mentioned it, which is that we were able to create intelligence that doesn't necessarily have, a drive to survive or whatever. It's just intelligent. And I think the real breakthrough, at least in my mind, is essentially the objective function is predicting the next token. Intelligence is just predicting what comes next.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's been incredible to see the evolution over time. What are your thoughts? I mean, 2035, I'm curious. I'll ask you that question. What's your vision for 2035?
I actually recently started thinking maybe the better way to get it in terms of time travel is instead of thinking in terms of 10 years, what is it going to be like if we 10x the total global intelligence, right? So right now, if you think of sort of the maximum intelligence that we have is if you just think of kind of the intelligence of each individual and then you add them together. And then obviously you have to discount for the fact that we're not very good at working together. And we probably put most of our energy into fighting against each other. But, best case scenario, total intelligence is just all the people added together. Um, and I think with AI, we're approaching an abundance of intelligence, right? And so very soon, and it might be 5 years or it might be 50 years, depending on who you talk to, we're going to 10x or 100x the total amount of intelligence on the planet Earth. And like, what does that enable us to do? And so, that to me is kind of like the age of abundance, right?
Hmm.
What can we create? Um, and I mean, I can go on for quite a bit about what I want to see, but I think a lot of it, one of the first things that will enable all kinds of good things is essentially if we're able to create an abundance of cheap and clean energy, which
Hmm.
I think will inevitably be some form of nuclear, whether it's fission or fusion or both of them together. But imagine if we're able to get electricity for like 1 cent per kilowatt hour or something, like that would just be good for everything.
I mean, that's almost a dependency as well, right? Like the only way we get 10x intelligence is if we have cheap enough energy, because that's going to be like the limiting factor, probably.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no physical reason why not, right? Like the physics doesn't prevent us from having cheap energy. It's politics and like lack of intelligence.
Hmm.
Yeah, but I don't see how like 10x higher AI is going to help us like with nuclear. Like just to build a nuclear plant, it will take us 20 years or 10, 20 years. Like it
It doesn't need to be though, right? Like
yeah.
that's a failure of human.
Yeah, but does AI solve that failure though? Like does AI, the political issues you're talking about, like those are not going to be solved with if we had a model that's 10x better than what we have today.
Right.
Well, yeah, Raj, it does put pressure on it because, one of the reasons the US hasn't had to push this energy frontiers because we just, like, if you look at like the last 10 years, I think even the last 20 years, the US energy usage has almost been completely flat. Whereas if we really were in an AI race, maybe we would be forced to kind of streamline things. And
Well, we're already seeing that, right? Just in the last like 6 months, was it like Microsoft? I think is going to reopen
3 Mile Island, yeah.
3 Mile Island.
Yeah.
There's a huge explosion. Well, maybe explosion is the wrong word. There's been a renewed interest, let's say, in
Yeah.
nuclear, and I think a realization that we have to go that direction. So I guess, and again, I don't know what the timeline is exactly. 10 years is kind of a number I like to use, in part just because, startup timelines operate on that. But certainly what I would like to see, 10, 20, 30 years is that we're basically done with fossil fuels or whatever, and not because we've suffocated the economy or like outlawed air travel, but
Mhm.
simply because we have better, cheaper alternatives.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess like energy and and AI is a tool. But what do humans get out of it? Like, if we have 10x more intelligence, like what can we do that is everyone just sitting around because they don't have to think for themselves? Now, like, is everyone kind of having the Paul Buchheit life?
So again, with the time travel thought experiment, a lot of times, yeah, I mean, it's just like, what do I want to see, right?
Mhm.
And so like one thing is, I think that we could reach a point where, um, instead of kind of continuing to sort of pollute the environment or whatever, that we can actually start to clean things up. So certainly I would like to say within 40 years, I'd like to say that the natural environment has been actually restored and it's cleaner and better. I'm optimistic about materials, like we can come up with much better materials than what we use today. It'd be great if we could get rid of plastics, right? People are starting to realize like anything that accumulates in the natural environment also accumulates in our internal environment, right? We've all read about the microplastics in your balls or whatever. Like no one wants that. That's not good for anyone. And so hopefully we have better materials. I mean, I think we can take a very different approach to how we do waste disposal, right? Where instead of pretending that plastic is or these other things are recyclable, we can essentially like incinerate and just reuse the atoms at atomic level. You're recycling. Um, so there's kind of like endless opportunity there. In terms of like what are people doing, I actually think like sometimes the missing thing is just inspiration, right? Like coaching. And certainly you can imagine like the difference it makes if you have, let's say, a good parents versus if you have terrible parents. That makes a big difference in a person's life, right? Is a really simple example of that. Um, but with, again, like a really smart, let's say, AI coach, essentially, who can help you to find, good decisions, purpose, meaning, whatever it is in your life. I think everyone can be essentially a better version of themselves.
How do you think, like, okay, so most people obviously have to work for a living. They often hate their jobs, right? Like,
Yeah.
what's I mean, I think in an age of abundance, as you've said, the ideal outcome is people are doing what they want to do, not what they have to do. But how does that happen? Like, walk us through the steps to like where people are doing things they truly love versus like, they're in like jobs of drudgery. How do we get there? I can't figure out the steps.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's one of the things I'm pretty concerned about in the near term, right? Because we're getting pretty good at eliminating jobs.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
And I'm maybe like not sure that we're going to invent new jobs as quickly. I think like self-driving is actually getting pretty close,
Mhm.
right? Certainly, I think within the next, 5 years, we're
I
going
mean,
to see a lot.
self-driving in cities is a solved problem. Now it's just about capital and
It's about
implementation.
politics. It's about
Well,
like other
Well,
stuff.
it's capital and implementation more than politics right
Yeah.
now. Actually, I think most
it's not
cities are very
entirely
Regulation is
well
a big
solved
issue.
yet, but
Yeah.
it's getting pretty close. I think the thing that is still a factor like for Waymo is the unit cost, I think, on those cars
Yeah.
is still pretty high. But yeah, clearly it's going to keep getting better and cheaper. And
Mhm.
driving is sort of like I almost think of it as like universal basic labor, right? Because it's something that
Yep.
almost anyone can
Yep.
do. You don't need great physical strength or whatever, right? And it offers a lot of different options in terms of schedule, people who need to be somewhere at a certain time. So that's an entire
Isn't
category.
trucking like the most popular job in like
Yeah.
half the states in the
Biggest
US or
employer.
something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I think that's like a pretty hard question to
Well,
figure out.
yeah, because I've been thinking about it too. I mean, like, obviously, the user, you mentioned the universal basic income, universal basic labor, right? Like, do we need a form of that? And like, how does that get implemented? Because people need money still, right? In the,
Yeah.
in the future economy, maybe at some point we won't, but like right now, people need a source of income.
But
And
something that kind of makes this worse is that I think technology in general concentrates wealth, but I think AI does it even more. Like
Mhm.
yes,
whoever has
absolutely.
the capital to pay for the GPUs, whoever, yeah, there's like a definite concentration that's going
I
to
mean, we're
happen.
seeing this right now in Silicon Valley. It's happening like right now, but people are hiring less because you
Mhm.
Yeah,
have
that's true.
AI, right?
Like you
And
need
like,
less junior engineers because you
yeah,
can have the
and the
senior ones
layoffs
people.
are not stopping. We're like people are, Amazon just laying off 14,000 people, And I think it's going to continue. I think it's going to, it's not going to be easy for the workers. And
Yeah, for sure.
it's going to
I mean,
get
we're
worse
like
before it gets
customer
better.
service is a huge one too, right? Like,
Yeah.
all of the outsourcing. I think, like in the Philippines, 20% of their GDP is like call centers or, some kind of outsourcing, which
Totally.
is
I
like
think
gonna go away quickly.
the slightly more kind of optimistic view on it is these are the most drudgery type jobs, right? Like trucking for like 9 hours a day is not. I mean, it's definitely a job, but it's not like people's
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
life work. So, uh, yeah, I think the question is like, what do we replace it with? And I think also like, how do we bring meaning to people?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that are, in the UK, you can almost basically get UBI, like the welfare state is pretty good, and most people in that situation, at least the ones I've met and known, like they don't enjoy their life. Like it's not like they're free. It's like if anything, they're like stuck at home without a purpose, watching TV on social media. But
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think those are gonna be really hard questions for us to confront in the next 5 or 10 years.
I think there's going to be a big market in helping people find purpose without work. Like I think that's going to be a big thing. I don't know if anyone's really working on that in particular, but like that transitioning to this age of abundance where you have everything you need. I mean, one thing I thought about is like we have actually kind of entered an age of. I mean, we're living an abundant life compared to 100 years ago, right?
Mhm.
We
yeah,
have we can get any fruit we want, which is crazy to someone like living 100 years ago at any time, right? Like mangoes are out of season. I can still get them at the store. So
And you
it's,
can have them delivered to your door. You don't even have
exactly,
to leave
yeah,
your
yeah,
house,
you
like,
don't even need to
just
get up.
press a button and mangoes show up or sandwiches or whatever it is you're looking for.
exactly. It is an age of abundance compared to 100 years ago already, and like what it does is that you spend your time on other things that you want to spend time on. You can spend time with your kids. You can spend time, working on bettering yourself. Be a better painter or better sports player or whatever it is. So I think there is like all these options for people to take on that are not work related. But I think there's going to be an interesting transition. I think actually companies working on that, like finding easy ways for people to find meaning, like true meaning, not just like TikTok stuff, right? Like I think is going to be a really big market going forward. Which is one of the reasons why I'm interested in group chat is like I think like there is like human connection is going to be even a bigger thing going forward.
Yeah, exactly. Community. I mean, again, sort of going out to the future, however many years, 10, 20, and saying like, what do we want to see? Right. Because I think it's like pretty important to have a vision of where it is we want to go. And a lot of times the steps in between are kind of messy or like hard to figure out. But if you don't even have a vision of what it is you're trying to do, then you're not going to make the right decisions to get yourself there. And so, yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to like, what would I want to see? And I think a big part of it is like, people taking care of each other. People, more time with your kids, elder care. So unfortunately, both of my parents have passed in the last couple of years since 2020. But at least I was able to spend that time caring for them in their final months. And that's something that a lot of people don't have that opportunity because the parents end up locked away in an institution or people are just too busy, whatever it may be. And so, yeah, I mean, I like kind of at my life, like, what do? I spend time with my kids. I spend time with family. I go for a walk. Like a lot of the stuff isn't really that complicated. The things that actually make people happy um, aren't necessarily like super expensive. Um, and I think with like the right inspiration and the right kind of guidance, people can be directed towards things that make them happy rather than just like addiction machines that just produce misery.
Yeah. And
To me,
driving trucks, which I agree with Imad, like that's not gonna. If you weren't doing it for money, you wouldn't do it. Like
yeah,
it's
yeah, and people would. So maybe some people would.
I mean, maybe
To
do it
me,
like occasionally, right? Like,
yeah, yeah,
oh yeah,
exactly.
drive a
Maybe like
monster truck or
let's just
something.
get
Yeah.
the truck out for the day. To make things more practical, I mean, normally, when I invest in a company, I try to go like, okay, does this thing need to exist in 10 years from now? And would this be, if everything works out, would this be huge in 10 years? So there is like as an entrepreneur, there's a practical element to trying to think about like what happens in 2035. So I do feel like it's tricky right now. I mean, as an investor, and I think as an entrepreneur to go predict this, right? Like the world is changing so fast. It's not clear where AI will be. It's not clear whether the incumbents will build the thing. or whether there's space for startups to do it. So I guess when you're talking to a startup founder and they are at this like ideation stage, like what advice do you give them uh, in terms of making like having a vision for that 10 years from now, and how they come up with like a practical kind of first step to that?
Yeah, this is a really hard question because I don't think the future's ever been like harder to predict, right?
Yeah.
Like because the technology is moving so quickly, and even if we go back a few years, predicting where we are now 5 years ago, everyone would be like, "You're nuts," right? It's not
Mhm.
going to happen. And so things are moving, I think, faster than most people predict. So I think, like in terms of startups, as always, it actually kind of goes back to sort of one of our fundamental rules, which is just that you invest in the people who are really smart and agile, right? Because we're not really sure how it's going to play out. And so the teams that are really performing are the ones that are continually reevaluating, continually updating. They don't have like a 5-year plan that they're like locked into. And actually, it ends up being an advantage for the startups because the more established companies have just like no capacity to move and pivot as quickly as the startups can do.
um I guess is there, there's kind of moving and pivoting quickly. Is there a space that you think it's like, you kind of have to commit to a space to some extent? It's like, oh, we're going after accountants or we're going after lawyers or something like
Mhm.
that. Is there a type of space that you're like, oh, this is exciting to kind of initially be in, that you advise people?
I don't get into that level of detail mostly because being a group partner is other people's job. But what we see happens, or what we see it works the best, is actually the startups that actually just deliver a service essentially, so that their customers get basically immediate ROI, right?
Mhm.
So instead of necessarily like selling them software, they sell them, we're going to take over your customer service, for example. Um, and so that way, those companies are able to actually scale revenue really quickly. And there are a number of these YC companies that, um, in a year or something like that, are reaching 10 million in revenue, or some things we never would have seen 10 years ago. Like they're
Yeah.
they're just scaling so much faster and with fewer employees. They have yeah, a dozen employees or something like that. And again, because the ones who are really good are actually using the AI tools to
Yeah, we had
scale
Jesse
without
from
hiring.
we had Jesse from Tech going on a couple of weeks ago. I actually can't remember if that's a YC company, but he had this idea of like you're kind of selling intelligence, right? Like when you say selling a service, it's like that's kind of like another way to put it, like intelligence as a service, which kind of ties back to our previous conversation.
Where do you think like this intelligence is going to be like wired into our lives, and maybe ways that people are not talking about? Like, obviously self-driving is like, is a way that we all kind of expect that we're going to be, our kids are not going to have to drive. At least our Immad and I's kids probably not going to have to drive. But what about other things that, like where other ways would intelligence be embedded in our lives? These are going to be areas that start founders can work in, to because it's going to become probably very commonplace.
Yeah, I think it's essentially everywhere is the answer.
Hmm.
Like I think about this in terms of what there's for me. It's hilarious to think that like power cords have microprocessors in them now. Like most people don't really know that. Like your
I didn't know
USB
that.
cable
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes has like an ARM processor in it, right? So it's like, where do you find microprocessors today? And it's like everywhere. And I think you end up with the same thing with intelligence. It's kind of fun to imagine like the sort of toys you can make, right? Like robotic cat toys, whatever, right? Like the next generation of kids in 10 years or whatever are going to have toys that talk to them and are alive. Yeah, your
Mm-hmm.
teddy bear has intelligence.
Yeah.
Um, it's going to be kind of interesting. But I think it goes everywhere. And I think also, for example, like another area that I'm pretty enthusiastic about is just what we can do with health and with healthcare and with wellness. Because right now, the medical system kind of treats like vague symptoms, right? Like we don't really know, like the situation with your baby going into the hospital, and they're doing all sorts of invasive testing and whatever because they don't really know what's going on. And I think, like, again, if you really apply a lot of intelligence, you can start treating the actual situation because we have a deeper, more mechanistic understanding of our biology and of exactly what's going on and what's going wrong. So I'm hopeful that we'll have a much more individualized kind of healthcare. And we're already seeing that just with ChatGPT. I mean, we see how many people are getting health advice. And actually, I had an experience with this recently. I was having a lot of trouble sleeping. And, like that's a pretty general symptom.
Hmm.
But I spent some time kind of like having a discussion with ChatGPT and eventually figured out that I'm like overactivating my sympathetic nervous system by doing too much hot yoga. So if I basically just I'm cooking myself too much. And so when
Are
I
you
stop
are you
doing
doing
that,
hot yoga at 10 p.m. or something?
no, but it like wires me. It's almost like caffeine. I just get it's a very powerful stimulant. And so, my resting heart rate was going up and I would just kind of lay there in bed and it feels like I've just had 2 cups of coffee, even if I
Hmm.
haven't had caffeine in days.
Hmm.
And it's just like a very powerful stimulant for me,
Yeah.
and so yeah, I had to basically cut back so that I can sleep again.
Yeah, we just, I guess for context, we just had a baby and she had COVID, so we were in the hospital. But I did find ChatGPT super useful during this time because,
Hmm.
like, I mean, there's obviously the baby stuff, but like my wife just had a baby, so she's got all sorts of symptoms. And you're like, okay, is this something that I need to call the doctor about? Or is this just like a normal thing that happens after birth? And, this is our third child, but you forget everything. So you're just like,
Hmm.
okay, this seems crazy, but is it reasonable? So it's been super useful. I think one of the somewhat positive things is most of these things that do require intelligence have a labor shortage. Like there's a doctor labor shortage, there's a accountant's labor shortage. I think all of these things have like a pretty big labor shortage. So, and that's just in the US, but it's actually like a global thing with doctors actually. So, if you can bring like a doctor level advice to like a village in India, that would actually have a huge ROI because like they might not have any option. Whereas at least we could still get doctors.
Yeah, I mean the
And
ChatGPT.
unlike a doctor, it just knows everything, right? Which is really kind of fun because you can just drill down on any topic. And with a human, you very quickly, run into things that they don't know, or they'll just humans also hallucinate. It's not just AIs, right?
Yeah.
Like people will say, "Oh, the AI gets things wrong." I've had the same problem with people.
Have you ever been at a doctor's where they literally answer your question by Googling it? I have, and it's like it's so disconcerting. I'm like, okay.
Honestly, it would oftentimes be better if that was what they did. Our first child was born super premature, 100 days early, and so we were in the hospital for many months in the NICU. She had 5 surgeries. It was like a very traumatic birth, but I would just spend, and this was back, 20 years ago, and I just spent a lot of time learning as much as I could so that then I could question what the doctors were doing because it's actually super scary, especially, when you're in an academic hospital. A lot of the doctors are actually just like kids who are just learning. You have the residents. The residents are a lot of times they don't really
Yeah.
know things. So like one of
Yeah.
them was
Yeah.
about
It's better.
to
Yeah, I agree.
start like a third course of a particular medication. And I was like, wait, that's not what the recommendations say. You're not supposed to do, more than 2. And I kind of like stalled that, because it can destroy the child's kidneys.
Jeez.
And so like I was there trying to be that person who kind of like checks everything because actually medical errors are, I think, one of, if not the leading cause of death. Like people don't like to talk about this. Being in the hospital is super dangerous. When my father went in while he was sick, he needed to go in to get like his heart checked before he could have this other surgery. The first thing that they did was give him a big shot of insulin, but he doesn't take insulin. And then they like crashed his blood sugar. It was just terrible. Like the first thing they did was almost kill him when he went into the hospital.
Wow. In the US, it feels hard to do kind of AI on healthcare because it is like such a regulated field. Uh, do you try to bypass the kind of healthcare system and try to build something directly to consumers, or is it like something that like tries to accelerate kind of existing kind of medical professionals?
Well, I mean, arguably we've already done that, right? We're all using ChatGPT.
Hmm.
And so, but yeah, people are also building kind of like doctor plus AI. And so, like one of our companies I was talking to, they essentially have, um, like a nurse or someone who, along with the AI, walks the patient through kind of a set of symptoms, takes them through the whole thing, and then the AI essentially, makes its recommendation of what's going on, and then they go on and they meet the doctor, and the doctor can review all of the information that's been gathered and the recommendations and essentially approve it. And in that way, the doctor is
Yeah.
able to see, 4 times as many patients, and the patient actually gets a much better experience because they get to spend a long time, talking through their situation. So the patient gets a long and detailed, appointment, and the doctor gets to see a lot more patients, and it's kind of a win for everyone.
Yeah. One thing, you might imagine, right? Like one of the main remaining reasons for hospitals, apart from surgeries, which are definitely, right now we don't have robotic surgeries. It's going to be a while before we get there because of the fine, motors that were needed. But the labs, right? The testing. And so like being able to do like testing very easily and like cheaply,
Mhm.
and then feeding that result into an AI, I feel like that's a friction point that could be resolved if there were like more testing stations available elsewhere. You saw this movie called Elysium a few
Mhm.
years ago, came out with Matt Damon,
Oh,
where
yeah.
people would just go to like self-scan for like cancer stuff, and like it would just tell you, and then it would tell you how to resolve the cancer symptoms. It was kind of an interesting vision of the future. Um, I kind of think that could happen. Like if you could make testing cheaper, like you could
Happening
actually,
right now.
yeah.
Actually, one of the companies I like, it's called Siphox, Siphox. They're doing, photonics-based, blood testing,
Hmm.
and are able to measure essentially, like, all kinds of biomarkers, and
I feel like
they've actually done
blood
a very.
testing was ruined by Theranos.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's
It's like
everyone
anyone that
now,
mentions
anytime you
it.
talk about blood testing, they're like, "Oh, Theranos," or, not like Theranos.
Yeah.
But these guys are actually really legit. They are doing something very clever that is kind of counterintuitive, is they actually already started the blood testing business, through, like, mail-in. So you actually could just do a couple of drops of blood on a paper. And so I use this sort of periodically. That it's a little bit painful because you have to, like, squeeze the blood out of your finger, but
Yeah.
it's not that bad. And then they have a new one where you can do it, like, on your arm. Um, and so they're essentially, like, proving out the business in that way, and then they can simultaneously, like, validate their hardware.
Mhm.
And so they're getting pretty close with the hardware, and that particular technology can actually, um scale down to being something like a continuous glucose monitor. I don't know if you guys have ever tried a
Mhm.
CGM. It's a pretty cool thing if you're into health. I actually recommend, um, everyone just give it a try for a couple of months.
Mhm.
The CGMs, like there's one from Dexcom and the other one is
Mhm.
the Freestyle Libre. It's like a little coin that you just kind of like stick on your, arm, and it just has a little tiny wire that goes into your skin, and it gives you real time blood glucose readings, like every 5 minutes or something like that. And so when you eat food, you can immediately see how it's impacting your body. And it causes a huge change in behavior because you eat something and then you
Mhm.
just like see
Mhm.
your blood sugar go crazy, and you kind of realize I shouldn't have eaten that,
Wow.
uh,
That's
because it
cool.
gives you that real time feedback versus like going to
Yeah.
the doctor once a year and then they're like, oh, your H1AC is a little bit high. It's
Mhm.
a very
Mhm.
different kind of
I
thing.
always wonder, like, don't you just learn the obvious stuff? It's like, don't eat the candy, eat the chicken. Or
No, not at all. I actually like, there was non-obvious things, like, for me at least, like a Fuji apple is shocking in terms of, like, what it does to my blood sugar, but also less obvious is sometimes just, like, the order in which you eat food. And so, like, if I have a big meal, like, for a dinner, and you have, steak and salad and whatever else, and then you eat a dessert, the dessert doesn't actually hit my blood sugar in the same way it would if I just ate the dessert on an empty stomach, right? Because it's kind of, like, stuck in line, I guess, behind all that other food.
Hmm. One thing that would be cool, and it's a shame none of these kind of initial versions of AI pendants worked out, but it would be nice if AI was like really part of your life and they could be like, hey, are you sure you want to have that dessert first? Yeah, like healthcare, plus like an AI that's like ever present is like kind of useful. A
Yeah,
lot of
that's kind of what I'm thinking, almost like with the really good AI coach or whatever, is you've got just this little, like, it's like the little angel on your shoulder, right? That's just kind of like helping you out. And I think like if you have something like that that's actually giving you helpful suggestions that makes you feel better every day and you're happier and healthier, um, like, you're just gonna keep using it just because it just makes you feel good.
It's also a lot of healthcare is actually like lifestyle changes. Like,
Mhm.
if you go into a doctor's and you tell them I can't sleep, they'll give you all of these like pills, and all of them are bad for you. And all like if you do kind of, there's this whole like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is way more successful than pills and way better for you. But like the health profession doesn't generally get a benefit out of selling you kind of better lifestyle changes.
Yeah, there's not a billing code for that.
Yeah, exactly. But
Unfortunately, like
AI might not have that.
our healthcare system, I think it's fair to call it, some people call it like a sick care system, right? It's entirely based around treating illness rather than actually making people healthy.
Yeah, I guess it's just where the incentives are. Like the
Mhm.
incentive is to medicate. But maybe AI doesn't have the incentive. Maybe they can be like more aligned with just helping you.
Yeah, certainly.
I wonder how many people right now are already using ChatGPT for like, stuff they would have gone to a doctor for. I wonder if like when is it going to start to make a difference and like people are going to go to like, primary care doctors much less. We're obviously Silicon Valley, we're like power users of this stuff, but I wonder if mainstream people are already using it for that purpose. You would think they should. I certainly do, like you guys.
Yeah.
The cool thing is now you can actually take scans, you can take pictures and upload it on ChatGPT. So it's really easy to get like diagnosis actually of certain things. My brother,
If it's one of those things where like the more accessible it is, the more you use, because like a lot of the time the AI also tells you to go to the hospital, so it's not like it's always like telling you not to, right?
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, that's an
you could,
important thing too, because a lot of times, people wait too long to go to the hospital.
yeah.
It's full too if you have a child, right? Like, because you don't want to drag them in because it's kind of traumatic to go into the hospital, but at the same time, you don't want to regret not taking them in, right?
Yeah.
And so it's great to have, some level of just a second opinion or whatever. And it could be hard to get someone on the phone quickly, especially if it's nighttime or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every time my child is sick now, like I'm checking ChatGPT. Okay, are these symptoms? What should I be doing? Like it is like that AI over my shoulder, like type of experience. Because I'm constantly asking, because if it's getting a bit worse, like I'm like, oh, I'm getting worried, right? So I'm checking, is it time now to go, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes it is, right? As you said, like if like my son had a fever
Mhm.
recently, it became an ear infection, and it's like okay, it's getting worse. I have to take them to the hospital. So, but I got the
Totally.
guy's opinion before
Yeah.
I did that.
One thing that's kind of interesting is like almost all the conversation we've had, it's like energy, healthcare. I mean, we haven't talked about education, but that as well. Like these are all like heavily regulated industries, and those are the industries that are most likely to either need the needed improvements for AI or most likely to benefit with AI. So I wonder if this kind of current push to deregulate is part of like what is necessary for AI to really have an impact on society. Yeah, any takes on like whether we're gonna get regulations will actually get out the way enough that we can have AI progress in a lot of these spaces?
I hope so. But also, sometimes what happens is we just kind of circumvent, right? Like I actually one of these time travel things again. We spent a little bit of time living up in the city. We don't live there. Back in 2006, and I just remember how bad the cab service was. I was thinking, like,
It was
my phone
unbelievable.
has a GPS, I should be able to just press a button, a car shows up, right? But I knew about, like, the taxi medallions, and I was just thinking, "Well, it's too bad it'll never happen." Like, I had basically the idea for Uber in 2006, and then just kind of, like, dismissed it because it's not legal. But then they just went and did it,
Exactly.
right? And then it
Yeah.
became legal after they did it.
Yeah. I think that's the way a lot of these things get done. You have to. I mean, the regulations are going to be way too slow to
Yeah.
like catch up. The
And so
healthcare
all of
stuff
these
for
things,
sure.
like we're all using ChatGPT as a doctor already or whatever. A lot of people are, there's tremendous progress
Mhm.
in education, because again, you can do completely individualized instead of
Mhm.
having a room full of kids and acting as though they're all at the same level.
Mhm.
If you meet every child, where they are, you can, like, we know you can be much more effective with education. Of
Totally.
course, then the question is like,
Yeah,
what are we
exactly.
educating them for? Is a big thing too, right? Like we're teaching them skills that they'll never need, maybe. So there's also just like a rethinking of like what is it that kids need to learn, um, and so that's a big question as well.
Have to learn how to be happy, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that's really important, how to like build real connection with other humans. Um, I think that's going to be probably the main skill, actually. I was thinking about this. We were talking about earlier, this age of abundance. I was thinking, well, a lot of these, Canada, especially, where I was born, native tribes, right? They have like some form of UBI, and it doesn't really tend to go well, right?
Oh.
And that is like one. So, like work gives you really meaning and purpose that people struggle to find outside. And if we don't teach people to have that meaning and purpose outside work, we're going to really, it's going to be a very dystopian society we're going to live in. So I think that's going to be probably the most important thing. Be kind, be a real connection,
Mhm.
get real meaning out of your life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's gonna be one of the major challenges of this age. But as challenges go, that's a lot better than what their ancestors had to deal with. Like they had to deal with like, how do I not starve to death or whatever?
Yeah.
So I'd
I,
rather struggle for meeting than food.
Totally. I was wondering, like, the people, instead of like a UBI, like a UBI basically kind of suggests that there's going to be higher taxes on like, capital or like, like people creating things and then moving that to other
We
folks
need a we
who
need a
would have
robot
work.
tax. Every robot gets 10K a year tax.
Yeah. Yeah. Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if UBI is the right answer.
What are
Yeah, it
alternatives?
hasn't played out well. But on the other hand, like, yeah, we haven't really articulated a lot of other alternatives of how we're gonna make things work. But I do think like one thing that's really great about AI is just the amount of agency that it essentially gives people, right?
Hmm.
Like your ability to create new things. And so like a more optimistic take um, is like if you imagine that everyone kind of has like a small business, just kind of like making cool things that other people like or
Hmm.
whatever.
Hmm.
Have another one of the ideas that I've been thinking about, a big limiter in our society is just like housing and things like that, right? Like we've made construction incredibly expensive and borderline impossible. And so like one of the ideas I've been thinking about is construction that's like as easy as prompting, right?
Hmm.
Like what if building a new house was kind of like using an AI art tool and you can kind of just like keep refining the design and then essentially press the go button. Like
Hmm.
how interesting and colorful our like cities and environments might become if we actually all had the ability to like visualize or construct kind of our dreams.
You need the robots for that, though.
Yeah,
Like, I need
well,
some.
robots
Yeah.
are clearly on the way. I also want to build like robotic honeybees. Like imagine a drone swarm that kind of like
Oh,
extrudes
yeah, that's
concrete
great.
or
Yeah.
something like that. And so you could create these like really fantastical structures that, would never be achievable with conventional construction techniques.
Yeah.
How far away do you think we are from humanoid robots, like doing, I don't know, basically any repetitive task to like a human level?
That's a good question. I mean, it certainly seems like it's on the way. The
Totally.
video demonstrations you see,
Yeah. The robotics
coming
interface is
out
going to be
of
important.
the various labs are
Yeah.
pretty impressive. Um, I've talked to some other people who are a little bit more skeptical just because like the training data they claim is sort of an issue, in terms of like gathering enough that the humanoid robot actually knows how to interact with the environment. But I don't see that as like a fundamental thing. I think we're still just like, our AI technology, as good as it is still really primitive, right? Like humans seem to be much better at learning from a small amount of data.
Hmm.
Um, and right now, we've done AI by just throwing massive amounts of data at it, but that's not a fundamental limitation of intelligence. That's just that our current AI isn't really that efficient.
Well, the good thing
Mm.
about humans you can see it with the baby. They're just continuously like trying things, like they're moving their arm, and it's just like
Yeah, exactly.
eventually they're like, okay, this is how you actually grab something. It takes them years actually,
Yeah, for sure.
but you do have that feedback loop with humans, and like in theory, you could make that with robots. Like with language, like LLMs, you can't really make a feedback loop very well. Whereas like if you connect an intelligence to a robot, there is this continuous kind of feedback loop. But yeah, it'll take a while to construct, I guess.
Just a random thought, random idea. What would you guys think of like a social credit system where people can like accrue like this social credit based on like pro-social things they do, right? Like you're coaching a little league, baseball team, you get these many credits. You're taking care of elderly people, you get these many credits. Like as an alternative to UBI, it was actually gamified society to some degree, where if you're doing nothing at all, you get like a very basic level of, income.
Yeah, this is actually
Why
an
don't we
idea.
just call it US dollars? Like,
Yeah,
why do we have to
exactly.
call it, like, why can't we just make it so you
We'll
get the money?
call them dollars. Yeah, this is actually an idea I've kind of been playing with for a long time, where I kind of thought about it in terms of like machine money and human money.
Mhm.
And machine money is, essentially things that are the produced by technology. And we kind of want to see all of that. We want to see massive deflation. Really, we want to drive all of the prices towards zero.
Mhm.
And then human money, you kind of think in terms of like coaching little league or whatever, right? And that you're able to kind of like build up a more human economy that's just like, yeah, you get some human dollars for coaching little league, and you spend the human dollars on some kind of art that someone makes or whatever else.
Mhm.
But I think, yeah, and then somehow, what do you do with the machine money? Where does that come from? Um, I think like it's a little bit of a cheat, but if you go back to if we had 10 or 100 times as much intelligence, we might be able to come up with better answers.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Right? Like
Exactly. Yeah,
right
that's a
now
great
I'm
idea.
kind of struggling because I'm not that smart, but if I were like 10 times as smart, I could probably give you a better answer.
Yeah. It feels like the main issues are going to be political, like coming to an agreement over what the system is going to be, right? And how we're going to help people who are going to be displaced, by AI.
Well, I actually think that's another area where I would like to see some improvement is just like getting along with each other, right? Like, um, I have this idea that I don't think I've ever really been able to articulate very well in terms of, I actually have it like kind of stuck to my sort of Twitter X, the thing about like meta narrative
Hmm.
of how do you help people to understand multiple perspectives, right? And
Hmm.
like politics is one of these things that really drives it out, right? Where people are like, not only is the other side wrong, but the people are stupid and evil or whatever, right? Like there's like no desire or even ability to kind of understand alternative perspectives. And I think that that's something that, again, like with the application of intelligence, um, if people are able to see things from more perspectives, I think that hopefully we'll be able to move towards more positive sum kind of outcomes. And maybe like the best analogy for this is just, the story of like the blind men and the elephant, right? Where you've got like four or five blind guys, and one of them is like, has the leg of the elephant, and another one the ears, and the other one like the snout or whatever you call the trunk, I guess. And they're all kind of describing something different, and you can imagine the scenario where they're all like in violent disagreement with each other, which is kind of like how I think our political system works,
True.
versus the
True.
scenario where they're actually talking to each other and forming a cohesive um, view of like what is the elephant.
Mm.
And I think that like with the proper application of intelligence, like we might actually be able to help people to get along with each other better and actually reach more positive sum kind of arrangements. And the same thing, even just at the level of like individual relationships, right? Like so many people, like how many marriages end in divorce or something like that? Like a lot of people are just like almost giving up on having long-term relationships. And a lot of it comes down to like failure to really actually communicate with each
Mhm.
other.
Yeah. And in some ways, social media has exacerbated some of these things. So you can, if you can only talk in like small bites, you lose a lot of the signal
For
and,
sure.
and the ability to talk to each other. But where podcasts actually, I think, help a lot. I think help, people get a full long form view of other people, and they build trust, by understanding the entire like viewpoint of someone else.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, yeah.
I do think society over time kind of fixes itself. It just takes time and maybe a generation to do it. But yeah, I do feel like actually the younger generation is much better with social media. Like my 13-year-old daughter is like genuinely scared of social media. She doesn't think of it as like all positive, but like
Yeah.
10 years ago I used to think of social media as like net positive in a way that I don't anymore. But it is still addictive.
Yeah.
Um, any final thoughts, Paul? What's like your kind of most optimistic thought for the world? So I feel like this conversation was a little bit pessimistic at times.
Oh, I thought we were being optimistic. I I don't know. I mean, again, I think like it is important to obviously, we can imagine negative scenarios. Like it's pretty easy for people to picture, a future. And it's pushed on us all the time, right? Like the planet's going to be unlivable. Like everything's bad, 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 bad. Why do we even exist? And that's fine. Like it's good to think about negative outcomes, but I think like if you don't ever have a positive vision for the future, you're never going to get there, right?
Mhm.
You have to be able to picture like, okay, what do I want to see? And so like, I want to
Yeah.
go take vacations on the moon. Like in 10 or 20 years, I'd like to be able to go, hopefully there's like a nice hotel there. I don't want to be like the first dozen people to go to the moon or whatever, but like once there's like 4 seasons on the moon or something like that, I think that would be a really great vacation. And imagine what kind of world where people can go off and explore, and just create new realities for themselves.
Or even taking rockets to Australia or whatever, right? Like
Yeah,
one
for
hour
sure.
round trip. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the transportation could be so much better, so much more
Mhm.
efficient, easier, less painful.
It strikes me as that, like, the way historically humans have like agreed on things and like, figure out a way forward is through emergencies and crises. Actually, they figured this out. So I almost wonder if that's what's going to drive us to this
Mm.
point where it's like some external crisis, that forces us to align. And so but I don't know what that's going to be. I do think, if I had to predict, it would be like things will get a little bit worse than before they get better in terms of like political strife and issues created by people losing their jobs. But I agree that we need to maintain a positive vision, and that's not. Yeah, if we do that, we can get through it all.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, maybe the AI will give us the give us the
Yeah,
Answers.
answers.
of course the AI will just tell us what to do. I mean, I think also, honestly, like when you ask about the regulatory constraints, one of the things that AI is really good at is like convincing people of things, right? And
Yeah.
so, one of the things I think for better or for worse is going to happen is you get more individualized messaging, right? Because you know exactly how to move each individual on a particular issue. Um, and, I do believe very much in positive sum outcomes. And so if we're able to, first of all, identify what the positive sum outcome looks like, and then just individually sell it to
Yeah.
every person, then we can get
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. The political AI is just like go sell nuclear energy to everyone.
yeah. Well, and people, it's not like totally unreasonable to be afraid of nuclear energy. Like Chernobyl was
Yeah.
kind of a disaster.
Yeah.
I actually grew up pretty close to a nuclear power plant, and we had these like sirens that would go off, and it was scary. Or they would I don't know what you were supposed to do if the siren went off, but I
Yeah.
remember being a kid and having like nightmares about like the power plant going into meltdown. So like the fear is real. But
Like
again,
there was an emergency and the siren went off, or was it
no,
like
they
a
just had the
test
sirens and
siren?
they would
I see.
test them. So,
I
like,
see. Yeah, yeah.
every couple of months so it was like, just an awareness. There's, like, one of these sirens, a quarter mile down the road from me, and they would just test it periodically just to make sure the sirens still worked. But I was never clear on, like, what do you do, right? Like, "Oh, it's the
You
meltdown, I
find a
guess."
lead box.
Yeah, I know. Like, there wasn't I think you were just supposed to turn on the radio or something like that, and then hopefully there would be instructions. Um, but again, like the things that make it dangerous is the lack of intelligence and the humans, right? Like Chernobyl, as I understand it, was actually triggered by they were just doing reckless testing on the thing. Plus, it was like a really bad design.
Yeah.
So like better designs are certainly achievable with greater intelligence, as is better operational practices because you get rid of
I mean,
the
France and China have figured it out. Like
I
Japan has
think
figured it out mostly. Yeah.
fail safe nuclear reactors is actually a solved problem. But yeah,
yeah.
we just need to execute on it. All right. Well, that's a good point to end on. Thanks for joining us, Paul. This was fun.
Great having you as always.
All right. Talk to you guys later.